Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about pitch, amplitude, and wavelength. We're going to be talking about these things from a listening perspective. So right off the bat, let's start with pitch because it's weird. So you probably, so if you have perfect pitch, let's talk about people with perfect pitch real quick. So if you have perfect pitch, you can hear pitch the way people can see colors. That's one analogy, right? So like I will look at like my phone, I'll be like, oh, this is black. Well, if you were to play like C, they would be like, oh, that's C. Just the same way you can see and you just know simply by looking at it that it's black. When you play like the note C, they can hear C. Now, there's a number of interesting things that comes in here from a listening perspective, okay? First off, people with this oftentimes struggle with C. Like, let's say that you're playing a dissonant interval, like C and F sharp. They might not actually have as easy as a time as you may think hearing C and F sharp as a tritone, which is a dissonant interval. It sounds like this. You know, not the greatest interval in the world. Instead, they may hear this. They'll hear the C, and they may be distracted by how much C sounds like C. It's like us seeing blue and red, and then when we merge them, if we see too much red or blue, we may not see a new color. We may just see red and blue. And so it's the same way with them. They may have a hard time detecting this. Now, this is widely variable across all areas, but it's just an interesting thing that you should be aware of when you're listening, that your ability, if you don't have perfect pitch, first off, this is a great advantage in many ways. If you do, you're still a great advantage. There's also some interesting things about how they might actually struggle to be musical. Everyone thinks as soon as you have it, you're just musical. It's not true. You may be less musical because you actually have certain neural networks in your mind set up a little bit differently. As a result, you have issues like this, which may make you less musical. So, pitch. Now let's talk about what pitch is acoustically. We're gonna go over some basic things. So let's just say you have a string, right? Let's say pretend there's a string and it's fixed at the two ends of my finger. So there's an imaginary string right here. As I pluck this string, the top will come up and the bottom will go down, right? It will go do, it'll vibrate. This is what's known as a longitudinal wave. Why? Why is it called a longitudinal wave? Well, it's just the name of a wave that propagates. Now, that's not like the official reason. I'd have to go look up the official reason on like why it got named that. I'm sure there's a reason because it's a pretty fancy name. But anyways, it means it's propagating in space. This is what would enter your ear and trigger you hearing. Whereas a transverse wave is a wave that would be like represented on your computer screen, like a sine wave. It's very important to know that as we get into this sort of listening thing. So as you pluck it, it'll go up and down. When the whole thing bows up and down, this is your base frequency. It's the lowest frequency this string can produce. It is limited by wavelength. So it's literally not long enough to produce a lower tone. As wavelengths get longer, pitch gets lower. As they get shorter, pitch gets higher. It's very, very important to know that right now. So as you're doing that, as you have this, it's built on a ratio series. So you have these 2 points, and pitch originally was discovered as a ratio. So if you put your finger in the middle, you would actually introduce what's called the second harmonic first overtone. Okay, so those are just fancy terms for saying the next note in the harmonic series. What are you talking about, the harmonic series? Like, you've watched my Sound Synth Basics. That's what I'm banking on. So that's what I'm talking about. So go watch Sound Synth Basics if you don't know what these names are or any of that. That's like confusing to you. So you have this and you put it in the middle and suddenly you have your next harmonic, right? And then, so the question now becomes, well, what if you want your third harmonic? Well, you just simply put your finger 1/3 of the string up and then bang, now you have your third one. Between there and there, that would be like the third, right? So if your length was this long, what is that? That's like a third. So you have a third and you just keep going up and you get shorter and shorter wavelengths. Your pitch goes up and up and up. It's how a guitar works, how a violin works, any string sort of instrument. When you get into things like drums, they vibrate in different ways. And there's a lot of nuances that I'm just breezing over right here that we could talk about, but honestly, we just need the general idea. So why is this important for us as a listener? Well, first off, let's go back to these people with perfect pitch real quick. So something else that's interesting about them, and this is important for you to know because it starts opening up doors in your mind when you start thinking about pitch. When you have a pitch and it plays, to them, if it's not in the correct tuning that they've been taught, like, you know how you have like an idea that this is the proper red, and then all these other examples of red are, so if you had like, let's just say, this is a pretty good example of orange. It's a little neon orange, but this is orange, right? It might be different based on how your computer screen projects colors and stuff, but this is orange, trust me. So now, is that your ideal orange though? There's actually, it's pretty close to the ideal orange. And then any other variation on orange, like burnt orange or really bright orange, that's pretty bright orange. So that's why it's not my ideal orange. And so you have like this optimum idea of what orange is, and then things go away from it. Well, it's the same way with pitch, with especially people with perfect pitch, because they have this optimal idea of what a C is. It's the same way as if we were to go into like a grocery store. Okay, wait, back up. I went ahead of myself right there. So the reason this matters is because if it's out of tune, it bugs you. But this out of tune thing was derived from a scale. And when we talk about the overtone structures here, this has actually been standardized to something called equal temperament tuning, meaning they move up one interval at a time by the same amount so you can modulate keys. If that's beyond you, because that sentence takes some background information to understand, you got to go watch my MIDI music theory, the insaneness of pitch. You could just skip straight to that video. You should be okay. And you should have a solid understanding of sound and synth basics. So this is like a weird thing, okay? So we've got this overtone structure, and this overtone structure is based on this ratio thing, but we listen to everything with wrong intervals. Like, we have this superimposed slightly out of tune thing. The reason why this matters is because people with perfect pitch are like, for some reason, okay with this. It's weird. So if they were to go up and play like an out of tune piano, they would be like a little, like it would bother them a lot, like way more than a normal person with out of tune who could perhaps even play the key. Or if you were to like transpose a song, so you had like, let's just say like Moonlight Sonata, they're used to hearing it in that key. It's that color to them, like how we see orange and we're just like, that's orange. Well, they're like, it's this key, it has to be that key. If you were to transpose it, it like messes with them because they're hearing what was supposed to be one color being like somehow grossly moved to another color. Like it bothers them a lot. It's like if we were to go into a grocery store, which is where I was going, and suddenly the bananas were orange and the apples were all blue and the grapes were rainbow colored, and like that, for some reason we had a weird eye disorder that caused everything to change colors. It would bother us. It would take us a while to get used to. So that's sort of how that rolls. So when we hear pitch, now this is what's weird. So when we hear pitch, it's the same way, except for we have this thing where everything's slightly out of tune, yet our overtone structure is ideally this thing, and it's just the whole thing's weird. Why does it work though? Because everything is obviously not perfect, because the overtone structure is, the overtones, first of all, do not have to be related to the fundamental as a ratio. And this is sound synth basic stuff, so this is a quick refresher. And the harmonics, of course, do. They have to be some whole number ratio of the fundamental. So let's get to the part. Well, there's one other thing we need to talk about. So we need to talk about amplitude real quick. If you don't think amplitude is important in hearing, it's the understanding of how sound propagates. If you have not had this brought to your attention yet, you're about to receive some information that's kind of cool. So as I talk into this microphone, you're not actually hearing my voice correctly because of acoustics. You've been duped by amplitude. Now, there's a number of things that go into this. We're not going to talk about all of them right now, but as I talk into this microphone, you are hearing my voice. If I move over to the side, suddenly my voice changes. There's a variety of reasons why my voice changes. This is kind of weird talking like this. So anyways, what's going on? Well, as I talk directly into the microphone, this is a Shure SM57, and it has a particular polar pattern that allows it to collect my voice. And just a brief rundown of microphones. There's a bunch of different kinds. Microphones have a polar pattern. That's how they pick up sound based on how you propagate sound, and based on how it hits the microphone and your acoustic environment will contribute to the way something sounds. Thus, the part where our critical listening comes in. When some people refer to getting your ears, sometimes they just mean a lot of listening to how microphones sound in various positions in various sound sources with various rooms on that have, variable acoustics. So maybe they move carpets and they take carpets away and see what it sounds like then. They move the microphone, they move the sound source. All these things change the way something sounds. So this is a Cardio 8. It's live in the front, but it has maximum rejection on the back, and it has side rejection. But something that you may not be aware of, especially if you're new, if you're a pro, then you're totally aware of this, is that as it moves around, the frequency response changes. So as I speak and you get 1K at such and such a volume, as I turn my head and turn this way, 1K may be perceived as differently. It would be rejected differently, and maybe like 500 hertz would increase in importance. Like it would get louder as I move over to the side. I'm not thinking specifically about this microphone. I actually don't think, upon thinking about it, that that's how this particular one would work. But it's a really, really interesting study and topic. Now, there's a number of other things that also influence the way this sounds. So if I were to like take this hat, this will be probably a much more subtle change. Maybe it might be dramatic if I do it close. So if I move my hat right behind this microphone, and now I'm going to move my hat up and listen to how my voice changes as I move the hat up. And so there. So, okay. Now, you probably heard some discrete changes as that happens. What's happening? Well, I'm changing the acoustics. And this is actually a dome thing, so maybe it had a little more dramatic effect. But it was probably with the higher frequencies in my voice, the bass probably didn't give a crap. However, whatever standing wave would have fit this would it be interesting. Anyways, what happened there is I was changing the reflection path. So there are reflections. We're going to talk about acoustics and stuff later, but amplitude, basically the way this works is as I talk, my waves propagate out of my mouth. Like I picture them as holographic bubbles. So you've probably seen, this is why we differentiated longitudinal waves versus transverse waves. So when I talk, sound goes everywhere, not just in like waves out of my mouth. That's not how sound is. It's like a bubble, and it ripples throughout time and in space. So as I talk, sound shoots up. Sound shoots up my nose. It hits the roof. It goes off to the sides. It goes directly in front. It goes into the mic, which is where the polar pattern comes into play and all that other stuff. It actually bends around my head. All these things play a role, and different frequencies are actually more directional than other frequencies. We'll get more and more into this as is needed for understanding from a listening perspective. But as I talk, all these things are things that are occurring. And so let's see here. The big takeaway from amplitude basically is when I speak, there's sound bouncing off this table, reaching this mic. There's sound bouncing off that wall, reaching this mic. There's sound bouncing off my computer screen, all these things. And we get into acoustics and diffusion, all this other stuff. We're not going to be looking at that so much in this series because that's more of like a microphone placement acoustic series topic. Maybe I'll have it as a separate one. I don't have the rooms or the microphones to really man a series like that. I work in studios mostly, but I don't have access to them where I could approach a series like that at this point in time. One day I will provide recordings that will give you that. But let's talk about some listening exercises you can do. If you have a microphone, I suggest you just mic something and just do a billion experiments. You'll learn so much. But another one you should really get familiar with is the way you can detect various pitch overtones. So all you need to do is simply every day for 15 minutes, and in correlation with your other exercises, start divvying it up. You may consider practicing a half hour. I personally can get lost in practice sometimes. And all you need to do is play the various waveforms. So I've just played the sine wave and I just learned what it sounds like. Just mess with it a ton. Do it for all the waveforms. You will notice you'll start to pick out these cycles as you get into more advanced and mixes. You'll pick out, oh, that sounds like it's got like a sine wave feel or a triangle wave feel. Now, a lot of things are distorted, and we'll get into FX and what those can do to signals later. But you need to this is like your bass. This is your core, man. Most of the crazy bass sounds start as a saw wave. It has a very particular sound. And one thing you do need to do, I totally recommend this. Now, I go over I go over these waves in more detail, and I believe the Learn FM Synthesis series. So go check out waveforms. I think there's an advanced video. I don't remember what it's called, but look up the waveform video. And then there's another one because we talk about phases in the harmonic makeup. And then go look up the video in Sound and Synth Basics that talks about this. You should look at that one first. Now, the reason... What I was about to say before I said that, because I had to say that before I could say this. You should listen to these waves in this plugin, and then listen to them in another plugin. So check this out. I'm going to open up Harmor. Saw wave, right? Whoa, that sounds really different. We can clearly see why it sounds different. They use a different formula for getting what is a saw wave. So I think Citrus is actually Citrus is a more traditional saw wave. This is the additive saw wave, so it's a little different. I change it over here. And I got duped a little bit by amplitude effects too. But as you see, they got a sort of a different makeup. Same formulas applied differently. So that's why I want you to open them up in different. Now we can get a sine wave out of this real easy. Oh, I turn on my envelope follower too. Keyboard tracking. My bad. Envelope follower. What the junk am I talking about? So we're still getting harmonic signals. The easiest way to do this, I don't even know why I tried doing it that weird way, is simply just take out all the top ones. Harmor from the ground up series in case you're curious. So you can do that too. And just listen to the different variations on how different plugins produce it. And you're going to start noticing things. At first, you may be a little perplexed on why they sound that way. It's more of a sound design tutorial type deal, but they have different envelopes. I didn't mean to click that, whatever. They have different envelopes that trigger the sound differently, different gating options, different smoothing options, different generation options. There's some oscillators are anti-aliased, others aren't. If you were to play this and say, for example, the 3 times OSC oscillator and turn the volumes off, you would hear, as you get higher up, it would actually sound quite a bit different. And then if you were to do this with a triangle wave, you get aliasing. And so it's important that you watch the Digital Audio Basic series to understand what aliasing is. So you just need to become familiar with what these bass components sound like, because they are your bread and butter for a lot of later sound design, but just listening wise either, especially if you're listening to electronic genres. So spend time listening to that. That's some basics on how wavelength, which is, basically just the lowest tone you could produce on a various instrument, and why it would sound that way. You'll also notice that because there are less frequencies, like from 20 hertz to 40 hertz in an octave, it's much easier to sound out of tune. But then we just talked about this weird tuning thing where theoretically there are notes that don't even exist down there. So it's like just weird all the way across the board. But there you go. There's my little spiel sort of on pitch, amplitude, and wavelength and how they affect you. They are all 3 much deeper topics that we will have more specific concepts for, but it's just as a general thing. Microphones are a whole nother topic. Acoustics is a whole nother topic. But as a critical listener, we are just making you aware, especially if you're new to this. So if you have any questions, let me know, subscribe, and have a blessed day. Those little sparkles at moments. So essentially, that's the sound. And it was made completely in citrus, no external, nothing. And ideally, you'll take it, you'll find a moment in it that you like, and you'll use that moment.